Hey Shanky,
Hey, Paul.
cool. Welcome everyone. Thanks for tuning in. This is another episode of Charted for today, 25th of April. And yeah, it's still really interesting times in the market. And yeah, plenty to look at once again across the world of DeFi, crypto, and yeah, some of those other challenging assets that are trying to make bigger moves or claim a higher prize in the market cap rankings at the moment. So, what are we going to look at today?
We'll start with the majors, right? We'll look at BTC and ETH. And just as a reminder for those who've been tracking us and listen to our sessions, we essentially use our tools, our methodology. Again, to be sure, this is all educational. We're not trying to give investment advice to anyone. But using our tools, we predicted where the price might be. And it was really amazing that BTC price touched exactly the way that we had predicted. Right, so that's what we learned last week, and we'll go back and see where BTC is headed. So we'll start with that, BTC and ETH,
Right.
and then from there I think we should look at some challengers, the sort of ETH challengers. We've been looking at BNB, right, Paul? So
Yep.
we'll bring that back in, and we touched a little bit on the sort of cross-chain things like RUNE last time, so I think we go back and revisit that. But there's another one I want to bring to the mix, and that's Solana. There just has been too much chatter, so to speak, in the online world around Solana. Just sort of, I feel the momentum is building around Solana. So we will try and again put our, technical analysis hat and look at what Solana is doing.
Fantastic. And we've got one outlier right at the end there, which this week is going to be Doge, and that hasn't had a strong correlation with the rest of the market. Obviously, very hard to predict how the community are pushing it and some of the other external events that obviously don't really show in the charts, but we'll have a look at it anyway. So, great.
100%.
As Shashank mentioned, this is all educational content, but we do hope you learn something from it. And if you do, feel free to drop us a message in the chat or a comment, and do like and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Correct.
Yeah, let's jump in.
Perfect.
So we start with BTC, I guess. That's the one we've been looking at. Okay.
And there's the line that you drew last week. What was that? 15th of April. So
that's correct. Yeah. So there's 47,000 roughly, right? The 47,752, I think, is the current price. We drew a line right next to it, sort of around the 47,532.97. We saw early on last week on 23rd of April, the price exactly came to it, and then kind of bounced back. But it looks like it's coming back right there, right? Like, so it's been red in the BTC world.
Yeah, and obviously, oftentimes Bitcoin kind of leads any price action across all of the alts and other crypto assets. It definitely seems to have been the case again these last 7 or 8 days. Of as long as Bitcoin was down, most of the others were.
Yeah, they were seeing negative momentum too, for sure. So I think there are a couple of pieces that I would look at very keenly in this chart. One is that let's look at the trend, right? Like, how strong is the trend? The easiest way to filter trends is to just look at moving averages, right? If you have the 3 standard, of course, people have different preferences, but 3 standard is what I like. Go with the 20 EMA, 50, and then the 200. If the prices are way above 20, you know that there's a strong uptrend like we were seeing with Bitcoin for a long period of time. If it's above 50, it's still a fairly good trend. It's still very positive, maybe not as strong as above 20, but still, sort of trending upwards in a good, nice rhythm. And if it's above 200, you know that it's still net positive, but the trend isn't that strong anymore, right? It has become a weakened trend, right? And so I think in case of Bitcoin, if you just look at the price action without, and in the market structure right now, without trying to understand the other pieces, it certainly is getting questioned, right? It's the prices are below 20 EMA, they're below 50 EMA, they're hovering around the 100 EMA, I understand, roughly in that zone. Certainly above the 200 EMA, so it's not bearish time yet, but I think this correction is very strong. It's in some sense a correction with conviction, right, is what I would call it. This is not one of those indecision points, but really something is happening. The traders are certainly questioning the price points, and the sellers have certainly taken control. If you start looking also at the number of reds, it's just unbelievable. It did see some retracements through its cycle, but this one seems very long. It's almost 10 days of yeah, exactly. In fact, 10, 11 days of red candles, with a minor sort of pullback and correction, minor sort of stabilization around 20th of April, but that didn't help much. It's just been down, down, and down. You also see very big bodies out here of candles, right? So
yeah, it's significant volumes, and we'll also look at 20th of April when we compare against ETH to see what was happening there. And but yeah, otherwise definitely every day just down and significant volumes in the red.
yeah, exactly. And the bodies are all sort of big and strong. There isn't like just a long wick like we saw early on, where you could question saying the sellers aren't really in control, because although they brought it all the way down, the buyers pushed it up. But as you start seeing big solid bodies, what is really clear is that the buyers are sort of losing steam. At least at this point in time, the buyers aren't stepping in to bring the price back up. There could be various reasons for it, but we won't get into the reasons at the moment. But it's pretty clear that the sellers are in charge at this point in time.
Okay, and you've got a new kind of lower trend line there.
This one, yeah, that's 200 EMA. So I just plotted that. We had ignored it because it was trending way above 20 and 50, so 200 wasn't adding any value. But I just wanted to see, hey, how good does it look as compared to 200, which is supposed to be more of like a longer term trend, right? Because there are roughly about, again, 200 trading days in a year, a little more than that, but 200 falls like a good sort of number. So it's just saying that it's just generally still trending upwards, but it's a much weaker trend. In fact, we could change this, Paul. Maybe we look at 100 here to see how the 100 is looking. And yeah, there you go. So it's even breached. It's below the hundreds too. So certainly it's not strong anymore. Let's put it that way. We cannot yet confirm whether it's bearish, but certainly it's losing its the sort of strength of the trend, if you may. I am pretty sure there are two other things I would like to look at very quickly before we move on. One is, let's look at the bigger picture. As the saying goes, look at the forest. Don't get lost in the trees. So let's maybe even step back and look at like this is a day range. Let's look at weekly. What does weekly look like? And if you look at weekly, it definitely is very pronounced here. That we have a very bearish week, and in fact, last 2 weeks have been red one after the other. Which is the same story, but just gives you a different picture when you start looking at it in this lens. And then if you check that up to monthly, I'm sure this month would look all red too. So if you go to monthly, there you go, right? So it certainly is saying that this isn't a great month. And if you compare it just month on month, it looks like the price is retracing back to where it started in the beginning of March. So certainly everything that it gained in March, it has shed in the first about 24 days of April, and we'll see where the price goes. My guess is that it'll probably shed it all before it starts new price discovery. It is probably going to go definitely below this point of 45,000. Coming back to the day range, I've drawn another line here, and this is my sort of next take, that the price might come and touch 44,124.63. The reason I say that is because it has seen support around that price in the past. Of course, nobody knows exactly how the market will behave. Nobody's seen the future, but it's quite likely it'll get into the 45,000 range before it then tries and figures out its sort of next course.
Very cool. All right. Well, that's definitely useful for watching there. How's it looking if we do the ratio of Bitcoin to ETH?
Yeah, so ETH has been going up. ETH is still trending strong, and in fact, there's been this sort of theory, despite a little bit of correction, that it's the alt season, so the money's moving from Bitcoin to alts, and there might be some element of truth in that. But yeah, ETH still looking strong. In fact, in the same period where Bitcoin saw sharp corrections, ETH made a new all-time high, going above 2,600. So that was interesting, right? Like there was definitely some divergence. And then, of course, if you look at the chart which maps ETH to BTC, that would be very clear and pronounced, right? We see these big green candles showing that ETH is moving in very sort of, conviction-based, strong green candles as opposed to BTC. And it's not surprising at all because, this is the exact same period when BTC was going down. It is seeing red candles day after day. ETH is mostly neutral, but then it does see some strong momentum upwards, and it does see its all-time high, right, in the same period. So that's what the story is. The story right now is really ETH over BTC in terms of relative terms, at least last week. And I think going forward also, at least for the next week, I suspect that that's going to be the case.
Yeah, and I mentioned before the 20th of April, and if we look at that there on the chart, it is a big green candle for Ethereum that day, and I think that might have been part of the sentiment for Bitcoin trying to make a recovery and head in a positive price direction again. But it wasn't sustainable for Bitcoin, and obviously ETH has come down since that new all-time high, but it's still looking like a stronger trend than Bitcoin staying above those EMAs.
Completely. Yeah, absolutely. I think that ETH is what I would say is a little more, a strong, determined trend. And Bitcoin is going through what I would call like sort of a newer price discovery. Now, one must remember, the session that we did a couple of weeks back was around what are the different ways to price BTC. So if you really look at BTC, I just want to show that super quick, and then we'll move on to our other pieces. If we look at that, for example, stock to flow, right? So if we just looked at stock to flow, I think let's look at this one.
Yeah, the one corrected for Satoshi. Yep.
Exactly. Yeah. So if you look at the one corrected for Satoshi, according to that, we should be hitting like 88,000 today, right? But we are half the price really, if you compare, right? And I'm making the prediction it's going to be closer to 44, 45. So yeah, nearly half the price, right, of what the stock to flow model is saying. So now, of course, you could look at it two ways. You could say, hey, stock to flow is another model, and maybe the assumptions are getting questioned, because we have seen the gap as compared to stock to flow from time to time, and also negative as compared to it. Or you could say that, hey, there is a buying opportunity here. In the longer bull cycle that we are in, BTC is going to come back up and recover to these price levels of 80,000 and more, and so this is maybe a buying opportunity. That's another way that some people are already reasoning. They're saying, hey, this is cheap, buy the dip. I would purely wear, a non sort of emotional, non-sentimental hat here, a non-thesis hat, and just look at the data. And my way of reading this would be, I don't think this is time to enter the market in BTC. And the reason being that I think you want to at least see some movement which starts showing price reversal, right? So nobody can exactly time the bottom. That is not what I'm trying to optimize for here. But if you really even believe in the long-term uptrend and want to get into BTC, I would say wait a day or two, let it bottom out some more. You want to see some greens sort of reversing the price upwards, some conviction of the buyers, and maybe that's when you want to step in, right? Sure, you might not get it at the rock bottom. Maybe you would get, you would pay a premium of a few $1,000s, maybe let's say $1,000 or $2,000 as compared to what you may have bought it at. But it's better than buying it at this price and then enjoying the free fall, right? So it's really that choice.
Great. Should we jump to the challenges then?
Well, let's do it. So I'm going to start with Sol, the new unknown sort of player, if you may, right? We haven't covered Sol at all. It's the first time we're covering it.
Yeah, and it's an interesting one because obviously it's got a great engineering team, it's well funded, and yeah, it's still aiming to be very decentralized, but it is operating less like, say, a community project and more like a tech startup.
That's correct. I think that's well said, actually, Paul. I think that's the best way to describe it. This is more of a tech startup than any other chain, which is more, decentralized crypto ethos type of chains. This is a little bit more like the good world of tech startup, more corporate driven sort of setup. If you look at Sol or Solana, that's the company behind Sol. I think we saw price points in the range of $5 to $7 for a long period of time, and in fact, even below that. And then March onwards, the price started seeing a lot of positive movement. There was, of course, a period when it was moving sideways, at least for the most part of March. And then come April, it has really taken off, right? It saw one sort of big push upwards in the first week of March, from like, let's say 26th of March to, sorry, first week of April, from 26th of March to about 8th of April. So a big push upwards. And then more recently, it has seen some huge candles, big green candles. If you start looking at these big green candles, like we have seen with some other digital assets, it means one of the two things: either that Solana is really now kind of taking center stage and coming into the challenger fight. Either that could be one sort of way of reading this, saying that now one should keep an eye on it, and it's probably going to become center stage as it continues to evolve. The second could be that it's seeing that classic sort of sudden pump that we see with multiple digital assets, and we've got to wait and watch to see what happens next, right? Is this going to be just a momentary 5 days of going suddenly up and then back down to its sort of point of support, or are we going to see more continued strong action? So that's something to watch for. The next week or so is going to be interesting as compared to some of the other tokens for Sol.
Yeah, it would also be interesting if we could find the data on just how distributed Sol tokens are getting in terms of number of holders, and because I know for a long time in those early stages it was in a smaller number of hands from those early backers. So yeah, perhaps looking at that in a future deep dive could be interesting.
Well, yeah, 100%. And I think just studying the chain as well, right? Like how easy is it for the ecosystem to really flourish on it, right? Can people build on it easily? Can you really realize the network dream, if you may, right? Like, is it really teeing up for that? So those things we should definitely dig into in a follow-up session. Paul, you have a great understanding of all the tokenomics and things around the network. So let's have you lead that one at some point in time, with sort of starting with Sol, and maybe we can compare that with ETH and other kinds of networks to see where it stands.
Yeah, because obviously on-chain activity can be a driver of a price when the token is representing that kind of native asset for the network. And yeah, that's very much been the case with BNB so far this year. As activity on the network has driven, it's most certainly driven the BNB price up. But yeah, it can't always go up. I know.
Right.
There's that kind of meme of up only, but yeah, it's not always possible, right?
Yeah. So if, for listeners who've been on our show before, they would remember that we have always mentioned that BNB is really respecting the 20 EMA. It started doing that somewhere around its early rise up, right? And then when the correction started happening in mid and towards end February, it has seen the price being a little volatile, but it seems to respect the 20 EMA and comes back and tests it. I think the same thing is happening again, right? We saw the price retrace back towards 20 EMA, go right back up and retrace again, and then it's hovering exactly around the 20 EMA right now as we speak. I have a feeling that it'll continue to do that, unless something drastically different happens. I do see BNB continuing the trend upwards. I'm not sure, as one of our guests, BTC Vix, that it's going to flip ETH. We'll find that out. But it certainly is a strong, good asset. Adoption is strong on its BSC platform. Things are still very positive for it. So I think it'll keep going upwards with a strong trend. Of course, retesting 20 EMA every once in a while. My thought would be, if anybody wants to enter BNB and believes in this play, well, keep your eyes on the 20 EMA, see a good opportunity. And for example, right now might be a good opportunity. It's still red, so wait for the next sort of price change upwards. And if it feels like there is, either a bullish engulfing or, some sort of a movement that confirms that the price is back up on its journey, well, enter right in and, ride the wave.
Very cool. And otherwise, yeah, looking like it might be range bound for a little bit longer.
Possible. It's quite possible. So if you were to just draw a line here, I think we could draw one here roughly, right? That's 621. And then we could draw another line here. Sorry. At this bottom down here. So that's about 458. So yeah, certainly it's sort of in that range at the moment, between about 450 to 620, right? That's where it's at. So yeah, so unless those boundaries get challenged, I would say keep an eye and watch for an entry point.
Great. Okay. And RUNE, obviously we talked about in the last episode as well, because we were seeing that point where they've released their mainnet and, everyone's kind of gone, hey, this, years of development from a project is now actually, manifesting and showing that it can work with its cross-chain liquidity solution. So that gave it a big boost, but not so much since then, eh, Shanky?
That's true. If you just look at this, and we've got the fib levels plotted here, it has retraced back to almost 0.5 levels right now. So it shed half of its gains, right, from its rise. I think what did impact it is absolutely what you mentioned. There was a lot of news, there was a release, there was just euphoria. I think that probably pushed it beyond where it should have gone, and now it's settling back at 50. For something like RUNE, my personal take is that it's too young, right? It's too early, too young. I'm still a believer in this cross-chain theory. I feel like in the long run, there might be something interesting here, and it could potentially start eating away from centralized exchanges. But I think we need RUNE to really see some volume. We need, and when I say RUNE, I mean the RUNE ecosystem, the Thorchain ecosystem, right? RUNE is just a digital asset representing that chain. So if the Thorchain ecosystem starts seeing a lot of good volume, if we start seeing the same kinds of incentives that drove people to, Binance chain and Cake and things like those, right? Just alternatives to ETH, or for that matter, even what drove people to ETH in the first place, or DeFi in the first place, right? Where people were getting there because there were great returns, right? There were a lot of action there, a lot of great returns through the summers of 2020. So if Thorchain is able to establish that, I think we might see the price action in RUNE.
Also, one of the key things that RUNE and Thorchain does need is liquidity providers. So in some ways, it needs people to consider putting assets into their pools rather than Curve or Uniswap and Sushi. So yeah, will be interesting to see how much value they can get locked up and what yields people are earning. And that is, I think, probably going to be the biggest indicator for RUNE at this early stage.
That's a great point. In fact, I totally buy into that logic. And I think you mentioned about looking at Sol and its sort of on-chain activity. I think studying RUNE from a standpoint of liquidity, right? Like you already mentioned, right? The liquidity puzzle, if you may. How much is being locked? How many accounts are locking into it? Right? What are the incentive scales? What are the kind of sort of yield opportunities? I think that might be an interesting one to study as well.
For sure.
Okay. Now we want to look at DOGE, which has been the talk of town all of last week. But let's quickly also look at the usual AMM, the AMM assets, if you may, Uni, Sushi, Cake. See what's happening there. Let's quickly eyeball through them. Uni is still doing okay, right?
Yep, we saw quite a strong trend with Uni, and it was Sushi that was faltering and Cake that seemed to be kind of taking up some of the loss. But yeah, Uni continues strong. There's no real reversal in the trend. below those EMAs.
Yeah. So Uni is certainly sort of going the way that it's been going for a while, which is it's still trend is positive. It's above 50 MA. It hasn't necessarily been parabolic throughout its journey. It keeps seeing these retracements, right? Big green candles and tons of red. Big greens, lots of red, right? So it's just keeps seeing this sort of up and down momentum, perhaps giving traders some great opportunities for swing trading, right? Because it's respecting this go up, come down, go up, come down type of a story. So if you have the right entry points and good exit points, sort of take profit points, with of course also stop losses appropriately set up, which again wouldn't be very difficult because you could look at, for example, ATR here, right? So if you look at average true range, I think we saw this in the past, and yeah, it seems to be the same. It moves about $3 to $4 on a daily basis. So if you give like a 2 or 3 ATR, maybe a little bit more if you want to be conservative, right? And that would be a great stop loss, depending, of course, on your appropriate entry point. So all you got to do is, let's say on a 4, you're looking at about $12 of breathing room, right? So 3 ATR should be plenty. And if you are able to very quickly get in and get out, I think you might even be able to do with a little lesser. So my take here is that you don't even have to be this fancy day trader glued to your screen to get some swing trades in here in Uni. All you need to do is just make sure you have the right entry points around this 50 MA, and then there are some areas of sort of resistance building as well. I could see these, for example. Let me just plot them very quickly. So we saw one area of resistance was around here, and then a second one that has been more recent with the ETH upsurge somewhere around here, I would say, roughly, right? So depending on how how positive, how bullish you are, you could certainly enter and then exit at either of these points as it continues to evolve. So there might be small swing trading opportunities, or you could do the reverse. When it hits one of these points and you start seeing a definite red, there might be an opportunity to short it and get one swing in, right? So there might be some of those.
Great.
Okay, let's look at sushi. Sushi price is way down in the red as well. If you remember, sushi was seeing that big dump of additional tokens, which I believe was one of the big causes for the price to go down. And it seems like that story is continuing.
Yeah, no, they haven't really recovered from that. And overall total value locked is also decreasing. So as we mentioned when we were discussing RUNE just a minute ago, if your capital that is in the protocol is reducing, then the total amount of kind of fees and activity that liquidity can facilitate is decreasing. And seems like the market is seeing that as a negative or a selling pressure on the sushi token itself.
100%. I think that's definitely what's happening here. In general, also, I think Uniswap V3 is around the corner, I believe, later this summers, and people are keeping a keen eye on it to see if does it, steal the thunder away from sushi, and what happens to sushi next. So let's see, right? Does sushi innovate? Does it do something else in the meanwhile? We'll find out.
Yeah, and they're in that hard place between both Uni on one side and Cake over on the Binance Smart Chain, where Cake is just innovating every day. There's more and more products and users. It's absolutely steaming ahead. And yeah, Sushi only innovated on one aspect from Uni, whereas Cake is taking that the whole way into kind of new product offerings.
Yeah, completely. I think Cake is the most innovative of them all. People have blamed it for being a copycat of these Uni sushi models, but having said that, I think they have definitely innovated on the business model side. They've done quite a few things. If you look at the trend of the Cake price action, really, or just the Cake price over the last few months that it's been in existence, it's definitely trending upwards and trending strong. It's still above the 20 EMA. For a long period of time, we didn't have enough data, so we couldn't even plot it because it was too young, too early as a coin. Now you can see that the price is definitely upwards of 20 EMA. What is also visible is that the price seems to be very volatile for this asset, where you see long wicks one after the other. Of course, sometimes you also see big bodies here, but it's very visible. The wicks are just longer than most other digital assets that we've studied so far today. And that just tells me that it's neither buyers nor sellers in control. Sometimes you end up seeing some green and some red, but seems like the market is still pretty volatile here. And it seems to vary from, let's say in this case, I just picked up one randomly here, 28 to 21. So yeah, it moves a good $7-8 every day. Let's maybe look at average true range to see is that true, right? And well, $4 right now, but yeah, it's still quite high. So we saw that while uni price is moving in the range of about $3 to $4, I think cake is definitely moving a lot more, right? And lately, of course, if you start looking at it, it has had movements which are good, $6-7 every day, up or down. So interesting one to watch out for.
Yeah, obviously more data will help with the long-term trends, but in that short term with the data that we've got, it is looking pretty positive for cake to continue to grow, unless, as we always say, there can be other externalities, such as, technical issues. And I know for cake, one of them has been just the amount of data that they need to sync off of Binet Smart Chain and just the analytics tools underlying it, at times causing their website to lag behind the on-chain activity. So hopefully that doesn't become a bigger issue, but barring anything like that, I think cake still has a strong trend there.
I think so. I think that's very well summarized. Should we go to our last one, the one that has made all the news?
Yeah, and it is a market outlier, not only for kind of on certain days being the only asset green when everything else was red, but also outlier in terms of the market sentiment for a few days there. And really, as we've seen with these kind of meme coins, the community behind it can quite often just push it in a certain way, depending on how that community is shifting or kind of wanting to move it. There was a lot of talk about, hey, let's get it to $1. And I know 5 days ago, even we were tweeting out of like, oh, right, you're at 40 cents, kind of getting towards it. But it's retraced a little bit since then. What's your read on it, Shanky?
Yeah, Doge is a difficult one to really apply any technical analysis to, honestly. Firstly, of course, let me mention this. All crypto is risky asset. Every single crypto out there is risky asset. As one of our guests yesterday, right, Theo, who was talking about NFTs, made a great remark, but that there is some objectivity, but there's also a ton of subjectivity into all these prices. And you could also think of the valuation models of Bitcoin or ETH or anything else pretty much the way you value NFT. If you think it's got some value, you're collecting those, and there are other people who also see it similarly, then it has value. There isn't really a direct math, so to speak, that you can always attach to it. I think that has an element of truth. Now, in some of these, though, one could argue that where there are yields or there are some clear sort of wins or clear returns, one could still start using some traditional methods to evaluate them, right? You could look at them and say, especially for DeFi or some of those kinds of coins, where you look at it and say, okay, this is the total earnings capacity, this is the total in circulation, and here is what the portion is, and therefore what the value should be, right? So there's a little bit of that math that you could engage in apart from technical analysis. With Doge, I think everything just goes off the table. So in my opinion, Doge is the ultimate meme coin. And so it's very hard to value it. I don't know what is the right value, right? Like it could be $1, it could be $10, and it could be $0, right? Like just totally worthless, because it really seems like it's 100% sentiment driven. It's 100% social momentum driven, not even technical price action, but social momentum. A tweet here or a tweet there, or people saying, hey, like the other day it was 420, which is the whole sort of legalization of marijuana 420 stuff. And people started saying, well, let's get it to 42 cents because it would line up with 420. right? Very abstract, completely meaningless, but it did see the price action. We did see it going up to 40 cents and more. And the very next day, then we saw it shedding most of it, right? Everything it had gained. In fact, if you look at this, it's amazing here that on 19th, it went up all the way here and, opened at about 43 cents. So big green candle. But the very next day, I think people had it enough, or people wanted to take profits, and this shed all the way down, right? So that's what's happening. And I think that in terms of Doge, the other part that worries me a whole lot as I read the news, and this is beyond this chart, is that a lot of common people are really putting their life savings, and people who don't necessarily have a lot of discretionary money that they can lose, they're taking that and applying into Doge to try and become a millionaire overnight. And some have become millionaires overnight. There are some who are apparently in the news claiming, hey, 3 days and I became a millionaire, which is all great. But the way I look at it is that it's extremely risky, and it's the same kind of risk reward that you would have if you went to a blackjack table. Sure, you could win it all, the hand, and you could walk out as a millionaire, but majority of the people don't, right? You're really sort of um, gambling, if you may, at this extent. So that's what worries me a little bit. But having said that, it's a free world. If people want to trade it, and that's where people want to double down, nobody will stop them for sure. My sense is, charting this is incredibly hard, because at one level you could read this and say, yeah, it's above the 20 EMA, and therefore it's sort of trending strong. But if you go as far back as barely beginning of April, well, it's sort of hovering around that, and there was barely any volume, right? If you look at it from, let's say, March to April, there's hardly any volume, hardly any interest, and it's a rock bottom price, at 5 cents and less. So I don't know, what technical analysis could really be applied to something like Doge at all, right? And
yeah, and I think a lot of people are talking about kind of the entry points. So what price did significant numbers of people buy in at? And right to the left of the chart there, we were looking at February. That was around the time of Wall Street Bets and GameStop. And then once they got banned from Robinhood, they were jumping in to Doge. And so, yes, there are some people who entered at that time who may have taken profits in April, who have, as you said, claimed a great kind of trading win. But for a lot of the people who've entered just recently, they've got all of that downside back to either February or even January prices as a potential downside if that sentiment changes on them.
that's correct. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, play it if you want to play with very risky assets, but it's kind of very dangerous. Also with Doge, if you look at it, even basic sort of price momentum indicators aren't very helpful. So if you look at this particular RSI, for example, the relative strength indicator, which will give you a sense of momentum, this clearly is saying around 13th of April that, it's already in overbought territory. Now, of course, overbought in a bullish market doesn't necessarily say anything confirmatory, but it's still a time when people would start watching out, saying, hey, is it getting overheated, right? But, the price, there has been more price action ever since that. This is, in fact, it was way down here at about 7 cents when we entered into the overbought territory, and then it spiked almost to 95%, right? So much overbought, and has stayed in this overbought for over a good period of time, from like 13th to 20th. So 7 days, a whole week it was overbought. So again, going back to technical indicators, I don't know if you can read much into it, because the overbought didn't dampen the spirits. The meme coin and the social pressure was so high that nobody's even bothered at the moment, because again, like you said, let's take it to $1 momentum is on, and it's above and beyond all these other sort of price actions or market structures suggestions.
Okay, well, yeah, let's see where we get to in the week ahead. But yeah, definitely from that analysis, we've looked at the majors, the challenges, the swaps, and now Doge. There are some that seem to be holding trends, others that are diverging quite significantly from them. So it's definitely going to be another interesting week in the markets over the next 7 days.
100%, yeah. And I think what we should do, Paul, is we'll probably tweet through the week as we see things emerging. That way, I think our listeners and our readers also get a sense of what to watch out for. If we see something interesting, of course, right? If it's either confirmation or if it, one of our suggestions or one of our discoveries invalidated because the price has moved drastically in a different direction, I think it'd be good to kind of keep an eye on it.
Absolutely. If you want to get those updates, please follow us on Twitter at GoingElliptic, or subscribe to the newsletter, goingelliptic.com. Obviously, if you're watching this on YouTube, hit subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any future live streams. But yeah, we're here every week, and we hope that you've learned something today. Once again, that was not financial advice, but purely educational. And yeah, let's see where this market goes.
Fun times, yeah.
Right.
Excellent.
Well, yeah, thanks for sharing your time with us today, Shanky. And yeah, we'll catch everyone again next week.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Paul. And yes, you've given some great ideas on digging into some network and fundamentals and activities. So let's maybe pick that up next time.
Excellent. All right. See you then.
Bye.